Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Southerner's Northern Garden. So today's a little exciting day, and it's also a day that I'm a little behind on. I should have got started probably 2 weeks ago, but today we're going to get started my zinnias through soil blocking and also some seeds from Sunflower Steve. So soil blocking is relatively easy. Now, soil blocking devices aren't like one of those super cheap items, but I think I got a kit a couple years ago for $70, and it contained this size soil block and then a smaller one. So there's multiple sizes. The interesting thing about soil blocks is you can start with these really tiny ones and buy these adapters that make the perfect size impression to pot up essentially soil blocks. And so you just move them into a bigger block and move them into a bigger block until they're in the final size block that you want. So the interesting thing about soil blocking is it doesn't require any containers, obviously, but it also air prunes those roots and allows those plants to grow a nice, healthy, fibrous root system before you get it out in the garden. And so I soil blocked my zinnias last year. Zinnias can also really easily be sowed from seed, but if you want to guarantee the best germination rates from your zinnias and other starts, starting them in a more controlled environment is always preferable. So the soil type that you're going to need to start soil blocks is a pretty heavy potting mix. So I'm using one today that contains very little, if any, perlite and then compost. And so it's pretty heavy, and you want to get it pretty moist. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. But first, I'm going to go over the zinnias that I'm going to be planting. I'm not going to necessarily show pictures on the screen because I did go over a lot of these in a video earlier this year. But we have Cinderella Peach, and so there's a lot of the Cinderella series, and these came from Floret. Oklahoma Salmon, Oklahoma Ivory, Little Flower Girl Mix, Queen Lime Blush, Cinderella Lilac, Queen Lime with Blotch, and Queen Lime Orange, which is one of my favorites. We're also going to be starting a marigold called Vanilla Cream, which is a really interesting marigold that looks kind of unlike any other marigolds you've seen. And so I wanted to start at least one little row of them with these zinnias at the same time, and so I can get them planted out in the garden in the next several weeks because they should germinate fairly quickly. The seeds I have from Sunflower Steve, they just came. I ordered them a couple of months ago, and it's just a mix of different colors from his collection that he's going to be releasing next year, I believe. So the seeds were a splurge because it was $100, but I get seeds this year and next year, and it went to a great cause. It was more of a charity donation on my part than anything else, and I also get to grow some nice sunflowers this year. Sunflowers are a plant that I love, but they don't fit well in my garden at the stage my garden is in. So because sunflowers get so tall, they really look out of proportion to the rest of my garden, which is fairly new, and a lot of the shrubs are really tiny. And so I think sunflowers will play a larger role in my garden later in the future. But this year I intend to place them along the fence line, and so they'll have something to kind of back them up, to tie them to if I need to, so they don't blow over, and also just provide a little height there in the garden spaces surrounding the fence while all of those shrubs and perennials are still developing. So I did make some little name tags here. We'll set those aside for now, along with the seeds. So the interesting thing about soil blocking is there's all sorts of different sizes, as I mentioned. And so you'll see here, if I squeeze the soil block, there's these little dibs right here, which essentially create the perfect little hole to drop your seed in, especially with zinnias, because they're really skinny seeds. You can basically just press them into this soft, wet mix here. But we're going to get started. I'm going to move the camera so you can see a little better. What I'm going to be putting these soil blocks in is this perforated bootstrap farmer tray that I purchased for seed starting earlier this year. This is one I hadn't used. These are nice because soil blocks have to be watered from the bottom. You can't water from overhead or you'll risk kind of crumbling the soil block. And so you'll bottom water. I have a full tray right here that does not have holes. Whenever these need water, I will fill that tray, let these soak, and then I can just lift this whole tray out that's perforated and let them dry off and grow on. And so I'm going to adjust the camera angle a little bit so you can see what's going on, and we'll get started. So for soil blocking in general, you want a really wet mix, as I mentioned. I mean, you don't want it so wet that it's falling apart super easily, but you want it wetter than you would for seed starts. And so there's actually some water dripping out of this, as you can see here. And the intention of that is so that the soil can become compacted, I guess maybe is not the correct word because you don't want compaction in seed starting, but the intention is that it holds together well enough that it's not going to come apart on you as the seed is germinating. So you get your soil ready kind of in a pile, and then you work it down the little device in here as best you can. Sometimes it takes a little finicking to get this going good enough. And this process is really dependent on the soil you have. And so that's why you need it moist, but also kind of thick. And so to the extent it's not completely full down here, press a little in to the bottom, just like that. And then, let me move this. You can just pull this trigger right here and it releases these perfect little soil blocks. And as you can see, there's a little hole right here that I mentioned that you put your seed in. And so I'm going to finish this tray, and then I think I have one more tray that I want to fill up depending on how many seeds I have. So this is probably one row of zinnias that I will do because I'm going to have a bunch, multiple varieties, and so having 4 of each variety will be nice just stuck in the garden in separate places. So let me get this finished. It's also helpful to screen your potting mix so you don't have any big chunks. I think the industry in general is seeing some issues with potting soil having too much mulch or wood particulate in it in recent years, just to kind of cheapen it up or keep prices lower. So if you can sift it to get out those big particles, that's probably preferred, but it's not a requirement. You may deal with your soil blocks falling apart if there are too many of those big pieces in there though. So that's just a consideration. Sometimes this just requires you to find the technique that works best for the soil that you have. This one's giving me a little more problems than I had last year with the soil that I chose, but it will still work out fine. It's almost easier to feed it in here. You see these big pieces of wood here. All right, I'm going to go wash this off and clean off my hands because I don't want to get into these seed packets with these dirty hands and risk ruining my seeds, and I'll be right back. So these devices clean up really easily. You can see here, you just want to make sure you keep them clean. You can see those little nibs that I was talking about here. And this is what you end up with. And so I have these soil blocks and these, and I really like using this during this time of year because I don't have to worry about those containers. I don't like wasting containers and having to clean them out because I do reuse them. And so this is simple as just popping it in the ground after the plant gets going. And so I'm going to pick this one up right quick and show you. Actually, they're a little too delicate. When they dry out, they're a little easier to handle, and you can move them around if you need to with like tongs. But for now, we're going to leave these as is. Now, because these are just exposed directly to air, you do want to be a little more careful watching the water to them and make sure they don't dry out as bad. That might be something you might have to take care of. But I'm just going to sit here and put in my tags right quick so I can figure out how many of each I'm going to plant. I'm actually just going to stick these tags at the back here, kind of in the side of this soil block because I don't want to ruin them. Some people use electrical tape as well, or not electrical tape, but like masking tape, and write the names on the front of it. Last year I laid my seeds out and took a picture, or the seed packets out and took a picture of the seed packets so I would know what order they're planted in. There's just all sorts of different ways you can do it. And so I have all of these queen limes. I'm going to do 2 rows of queen limes because they're one of my favorite. 1 row of queen lime blotch and 1 Queen Lime Blush. So I have all of these left, and I'm obviously not planting that many sunflowers. That's 20 rows or 20 sunflower plants. I'm just going to do 8, and so what I'm going to do is move one of these over, and I'll have 2 Queen Lime Orange, 2 Queen Lime Blotch Rose, Flower Girl mix. I'll have 2 of those as well. You know what, maybe we will do 2 marigolds instead, because the marigolds look super interesting, and so I'll do 2 marigolds. All right, and then we're going to get started planting. Planting is really easy as well, since there's already this little divot in here from those nubs I showed you. This is Queen Lime with Blotch, and so these go here. It's really as simple as pressing the seed down, particularly Zinnia seeds, because of the way they're shaped. They're really skinny and narrow. You can just press these into the soil very easily if I don't spill them all on my patio. Didn't get many seeds in this one. This one came from Swallowtail Garden Seeds, and so there are very few seeds in this packet. And we're just going to put 1 in there, or 2 if I accidentally drop more than 1. Zinnias tend to germinate really well, and so I'm not terribly wasteful of seeds in that regard with zinnias. Floret is pretty generous with the number of seeds they provide, which is nice. All right, we've got all of the zinnias and the marigolds planted. I got dirt all over my face just now. We'll plant 8 sunflowers. I will probably start a little more of these later to have a little succession, but for now, I'll just start 8 to make sure we get good germination and I'm not doing anything wrong. So these are all different sizes because I mentioned we're not sure what colors we may get since it is a mix. But they're really, some of them are really interestingly shaped. I don't know if you can see that there, but they're kind of fat. So I'm just going to poke these down in the holes as well, and we'll see what we get this year. All right, now that we've got everything in the little hole, you can either take a little bit of dirt and push and cover the seed with that, but I just tend to like very gently because you don't want to mess up the soil block, but you can kind of press the soil in around the seed just to get good soil contact. And that's sufficient in most cases to get them to germinate pretty well. So I'm going to go through and cover all of these little divots up that the seed's in, and that's it. So what I'm going to do with these, I'm going to keep them outside. I'm not bringing these inside. We're past our last frost date. I don't have to worry about hardening them off, but I'm going to set them right here beside me. That'll keep them out of the way of the pets, and it will also allow them to not be directly exposed to the sun. Not because you don't want your seedlings getting sufficient sunlight, but to prevent drying out too quickly. So we're having kind of unusually hot days for May. It was 85, 86, and it's been that way most of this week. And so I don't want these drying out and ruining the germination. And so I'll set them down here, check them every evening to make sure they're sufficiently moist. These do not need to be watered in now. If you water them now, you'll risk damaging the structure of the soil block. The soil's sufficiently moist right now. Just check on them every evening. Maybe if you have time, twice a day to make sure they're not drying out too much. But that will be really easy because I have this perforated tray here that I can just add stuff to. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope this was interesting and you learned something about soil blocking. If you've never given it a try, I certainly think it's worth the investment, and I think I will be doing more seed starting indoors next year by soil blocking. And one of those reasons is you can buy those extremely tiny soil blocks that I mentioned for. So if you want to test germinate seeds or just make sure you get good germination without taking up a bunch of space, you can get them started in those tiny, tiny soil blocks without wasting containers, wasting extra potting soil that you would just throw away. And so it's a great method, super easy to do, and I highly recommend it. So thank you guys for joining me, and remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Take care, everyone. Bye.